Hello, everybody. Welcome on into the GSMC Football Podcast once again. My name is Matthew Quinn. I am your host, as always, and we are, as always, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And we have a great show for you today. A lot of things happening in the NFL as far as free agency, and we're going to cover as much of that as we can with much news that has been happening over the past few days. It's kind of hard to cover everything, so we'll do our best to cover that. We'll be spending about 2 segments on free agency. It's a pretty free agency heavy show for you today. And make sure that you stick around for later in the show. I will be continuing the ongoing series of the season outlooks, as well as giving predictions on the two teams that we're going to be covering today. And then we'll be ending with a little bit more free agency talk. So before we start, I do want to ask you guys that you can like and follow the show as always. Any comments do help. Any support donations are always a great help. If you've got a question during the show, we want to hear it. So your input is a big part of what makes the show great. And we thrive on your energy and your insights. Whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or an opinion you just have to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make absolutely sure that your message does stand out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that. Use the super chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air. And it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. So we really rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports that you guys love. And we appreciate every single bit of your support. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking. Hit that super chat button and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. And if you prefer, you can also go to gsmcsports.net to tip, donate, and leave a question or comment there. We couldn't do what we do without your amazing support, so we're so thankful to have you as part of our community. And once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the first segment of the day. It's going to be kind of an ongoing theme here with free agency, kicking off, and the legal tampering period, kicking off today at noon earlier today. There were a lot of moves prior to today. We had a few moves that we talked about a little bit in the show yesterday with some of the moves that happened with the DK Metcalf thing and, a number of other trades and free agents pickups and all that. So basically today there was a lot more of that. One of the bigger ones that kind of sticks out in a lot of people's minds is the Sam Darnold signing to the Seahawks. And Seahawks have been quite busy over the past few days or so. They were, of course, started by cutting Tyler Lockett, and then they made it known that DK Metcalf was going to be available for a trade, and then he was ultimately traded to the Steelers for a second-round pick, and then he ended up signing a nice big contract extension as well. And now today, after Geno Smith was traded to the Raiders, the Seahawks get their quarterback finally, and it's Sam Darnold, which was a lot of people did think that this was going to end up happening right after the Geno Smith trade to the Raiders happened. A lot of people started speculating that Sam Darnold could be on the move to Seattle, and here we go. So he signs a 3-year deal. It's about $100 million. It's pretty fair for both sides, I think. It's not necessarily the number that you would have probably thought he was going to get a little bit earlier in the season, as opposed to those last 2 games in which he kind of struggled and showed a little bit of the old Sam Darnold that is not as appealing as what we saw in the first 15 weeks or so of the season when he was playing at nearly an MVP level, throwing for tons of touchdowns, tons of yards just about every game. Looked really, really good in that system. So he earned himself a little bit of a payday. If he would have continued and finished strong, he probably would have gotten more money. Maybe he would have went somewhere else too, so who knows. But it ends up being a pretty good deal for Darnold. The only issue with Seattle now is they're going to need to try and find some depth at the wide receiver position because right now they only have Jackson Smith and Jigba really as a proven, main target. With Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf both gone, they're going to probably need to dip into possibly the draft to go and get a wide receiver. There's not a ton of free agent receivers available right now. A lot of them have been taken up with Devontae Adams going to the Rams, DK going to the Seahawks, obviously. And Darius Slayton was another receiver that was kind of on the board, but the Giants re-signed him earlier today, so he's off the board as well. Christian Kirk is off the board also, but a number of other receivers are still there. A guy like Amari Cooper from Buffalo last year, and then of course Stephon Diggs, which he has not really been talked about a whole lot so far in the offseason, but he is a free agent. He only signed a 1-year deal with Houston last year and had a few injuries here and there, but he's still a solid receiver, so maybe they go that route. Seattle, that is, but we'll have to see what they do. Another piece of information that came down was Chris Godwin going back to the Bucks, but not only that, but they went ahead and signed Hassan Reddick to a 1-year deal as well. The Bucks did, so it's good for the Bucks to get Chris Godwin back, because they obviously still have Mike Evans, and that connection with Baker Mayfield has worked out to this point. So it's a good idea for the Buccaneers to sign or re-sign a guy like that. And that's exactly what they did. He ended up signing a 3-year, $66 million deal, which has about $42 million of it guaranteed. So they're bringing him back pretty decent, pretty, level price. I think that's pretty fair for him. But he was one of the main guys out there that people were looking at maybe trying to get, because he is, obviously a very talented receiver. So he was going to be on a lot of people's short lists in terms of trying to get a receiver. So he is now locked up with the Buccaneers for the foreseeable future, and we'll see, what other things happen in free agency in terms of wide receiver. Another big one that happened as well was Milton Williams to New England. That's the big defensive lineman from Philadelphia. He was one of the more well-known free agents that was going to come out this year. The Patriots getting their defensive line up to snuff, boosting it with Mike Vrabel as the head coach. Obviously, he's a defensive-minded head coach, but wanting to bring in a few guys like that is definitely helpful. And then they, of course, did also sign Robert Spillane, who knows Mike Vrabel from his time in Tennessee. So there's a little bit of a connection there. So solid moves from New England to try and get their defensive line shored up, which was one of the needs that we did talk about a few days ago when we talked about the Patriots on our season outlook series. But good move for them. They still, of course, have a few more moves that they need to make. It does address a need. So, one step in the right direction for the Patriots there. One of the bigger contracts, in terms of numbers, happened earlier today, and that was the young corner J.C. Horn from Carolina. He is re-signed by the Panthers for a 4-year, $100 million contract that it is worth up to $108 million in incentives and things of that nature. So he, with that contract, becomes the highest paid defensive back in NFL history. So good job there for the Panthers, locking a guy like that down. He is a young guy, and he is, obviously very talented. Doesn't get a ton of recognition, mainly because of where he plays, I believe, in Carolina. They're not necessarily the pillar of success, or haven't been, at least in recent years. So he doesn't get as much attention as, somebody like in a high profile market like the Jets, like a Sauce Gardner or something like that would get a lot of attention. And, rightfully so, because he's very good as well. But Panthers doing a good job getting him locked up as well. I was trying to move through some of these other signings that we had. Guy that we've talked about a lot on this show, DJ Reed. He is no longer available, as he is signing a contract with the Detroit Lions. It's a 3-year deal, $48 million. 32 of it is guaranteed, $32 million that is guaranteed. So the Lions obviously wanted to shore up their secondary, especially with the earlier news that Carlton Davis was no longer going to be there, as he moved on and signed a contract elsewhere. So they needed to shore up that secondary, and they do a good job here by getting one of the premier guys that are on the market in DJ Reed. We've mentioned him a lot over the past few days in doing our season outlooks and, things of that nature. his name's come up a lot. Few other guys' names that we've talked about a lot have come up. Nate Hobbs is another one. The Packers went ahead and got him from the Raiders. That was earlier today as well. So, all these guys are getting snatched up, but this is what free agency is about. Every year this always happens. It's right before, because free agency technically it hasn't even started yet, but it starts on Wednesday. So at 4 o'clock, all these deals that we've been talking about over the past few days, they will be final at 4 o'clock. They can go ahead and do that. There's been some rumors going on about Aaron Rodgers and his connections with the Steelers, but nothing can happen with Aaron Rodgers until Wednesday, because that is when the Jets are set to officially release him at the start of the new league year. So we probably won't hear anything about what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers until Wednesday, I would imagine, unless, for some reason they decide to leak the information earlier than Wednesday. But they can't release him until Wednesday, so probably won't hear much from that regard. That kind of goes into a little bit about the Steelers quarterback situation. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next segment once we get to some other free agency signings. But Aaron Rodgers seems to be linked to not only the Steelers, but also the Giants. So there's been conversations with both teams that Aaron Rodgers' people have had. So we'll just have to wait and see, essentially, with him. I know he's kind of a more like a higher known or higher profile type of player. Despite his age, he still is Aaron Rodgers, and his name carries some weight just because of what he has accomplished in his career so far. He's not on the level that he used to be, but he did used to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. A lot of people considered him the best quarterback in the league for a short time there. Obviously, he's not that guy now. Don't think it's going to cost a ton to get Aaron Rodgers. He may want more than what he actually is worth. That's a possibility as well that could lead to some delays in deals here and there. Because as much as he is connected with the Steelers, I don't believe the Steelers are going to overpay for a guy like that. But only time will tell, as the case is with a lot of these free agency signings. But that is it for just the first part of this free agency heavy show. When we come back, we're going to get into some more of the signings that happened over the course of these past few days, not just today. But there were a lot of moves today, so got a lot to get through. So we're going to go ahead and do that, but we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we'll get right into that second segment. Okay, so just stick with us. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, guys, welcome on back to the show. Before we get into our second segment, just want to give you guys a quick reminder. Any sort of support or any questions or comments, tips, donations that you guys might have, go ahead and hit those over at the super chat. Any sort of support is always helpful. You can hit GSMCsports.net and you can type in your question or comment there, or you can jot a comment down in the comment section of YouTube, and we will get to your comments possibly at the end of the show. But if you want to get your comment read during the show when it's live here shortly in the next couple of days, then use the super chat feature that we have mentioned several times on these shows. So we'll go ahead and get into this second part of the show. Once again, thank you for all of your support. So let's go ahead and get into the second part of our show. So we're going to continue on with the NFL free agency period, just free agency frenzy. There's a lot of stuff that is going on still. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some deals that happened while I'm doing this show. It's just been that kind of period for the NFL right now. And that's just kind of the way it always is in free agency. Lots of moves, rapid fire, especially at the beginning. And then things sort of die down a little bit in a few days. And then they focus eventually just ultimately starts to shift towards the NFL draft as things calm down with free agency. But one of the bigger stories that came out today in terms of free agency, I did want to spend a little bit of time on just because I have talked about this, pretty much at length in several other shows about the Steelers quarterback situation with the news that Justin Fields has signed a 2-year, $40 million deal with the New York Jets. $30 million of it is guaranteed. So he will be playing in East Rutherford and not in Pittsburgh, like I have mentioned that I kind of sort of assumed was going to happen this year, that they were going to get a deal done for Justin Fields. But the thing that was kind of curious about this whole situation for me as a Steeler fan is going to the Jets was kind of curious, just simply not even so much that it was the Jets, but for the amount of money that he's going to the Jets for. It's not, if you compare him to other quarterbacks on the market, it's not a ton of money by comparison. It's roughly about $20 million a year that he's going to be getting in a quarterback market that's typically right around about $30 million, if not more so, depending on the quarterback. So it's a little on the cheaper side. So it's one of those situations where the Steelers absolutely have the money to be able to get a deal like that done. Wouldn't surprise me if they signed Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers or one of these veterans for a deal that's sort of similar to that deal. So they could have gotten Justin Fields. In my opinion, I feel like there was a little bit more to it. I feel like Justin Fields, I don't believe him and his team, his camp or whatever, didn't really feel like the Steelers and Mike Tomlin were going to be true to their word in actually giving him a legitimate chance to be the starter in Pittsburgh. I feel like Justin Fields didn't believe that he had a future as a starter in Pittsburgh, and that's ultimately what led him to decide to leave. Not really sure why he chose the Jets. I feel like he could have gotten a contract just like that, maybe even more so, with a better situation, like going to a different team that has a better situation. But that's where he decided to go. It's going to be interesting to say the least. Now, the Jets do have a new coaching staff, so maybe things will be a little bit different. There's still some good players on that team. He's going to be teamed up again with his Ohio State teammate and Garrett Wilson. Be the first time since their Ohio State days that they'll be throwing and catching the ball together. So that'll be interesting to see because obviously Garrett Wilson is a tremendous wide receiver, and Justin Fields has the tools to be a solid, quarterback for any team, really. It's just he has a couple things that he needs to work on, just reading defenses or, just having a little bit more poise in the pocket. These kind of things I feel like can be coached. And hopefully he gets, the most out of it in New York. So hopefully that works out for him. Wish him nothing but the best as a Steeler fan. I wish he would have ended up in Pittsburgh, but unfortunately that's not the way things work out sometimes. But he's in New York now, so we'll have to see what the Steelers end up doing at quarterback, as there still hasn't been any movement there as far as who their quarterback's going to be next year. It's not going to be Justin Fields, so we know that already. But moving on to some other signings that we did see. Speaking of the Steelers, they did make a move actually to get some veteran presence on the back end of their secondary. They've got Darius Slay, who signs a deal with the Steelers. None of the terms have come out yet, just simply because he is another one of those situations where he hasn't officially been released from Philadelphia yet. Expecting that to happen in the next day or so. and then that deal will be finalized most likely on Wednesday at 4 o'clock, along with all the other deals that are waiting for that deadline. But so he signs with the Steelers. It's not really a move, me being a Steeler fan, it's not really a move that, turns up the needle, or gets my excitement, hype. It's a very lateral move for me because I feel like the Steelers have done this before. Got a guy who's kind of in the older or the back end of his contract or back end of his career, I should say. And it might work for a season at times, but he's not the guy who's going to solve their secondary issues. They need to actually fix the position rather than just trying to put a Band-Aid on it. But I'm trying not to make this second segment so much about the Steelers. It's just kind of turned in that way, just the way free agency is unraveled so far. But so that's it for Darius Slay signing with the Steelers, pairing with JPJ, Joey Porter Jr. So it'll be interesting at least to see him try and teach Joey Porter Jr. Some of the other little things that Joey might not necessarily know yet, being a young corner. So he's at least got that experience, so that'll help, the Steelers secondary a little bit. So, but moving on, as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier before, Nate Hobbs goes to the Packers. Big move for them. Now their secondary is even better with them getting Xavier McKinney last year, and now, of course, they get Nate Hobbs, one of the top corners that was available in free agency. They get him as well, so good job for the Packers there, shoring up that secondary, and that just makes that team that much more, competitive each and every year when they get guys like that. Because Jordan Love is, of course, still growing. He's still a young quarterback, but he is talented. There's a lot of upside there. So you want to build as good of a team around him as you can, and a lot of that has to do with shoring up both defense and offense. So the Packers doing a good job there, getting Nate Hobbs. So that will be a pretty good secondary overall for the Packers. So, good job from them. If you take a look at another move that was kind of sort of surprising for a lot of people, at least, the people that I read online all seemed pretty surprised by it. But Laramie Tunsil gets traded to the Commanders from the Texans. That is a big move for the Commanders. That shores up the offensive line, a big need, and then, a really, really good player at that position as well. It's pretty surprising to me that Houston traded him because they need some offensive line help. And with CJ Stroud kind of, I don't want to necessarily say regressing because he still was talented enough, but not necessarily having as good a year as he had as a rookie. There were a lot of issues in protection as far as, sacks and all that. So having them trade probably their best offensive lineman is a little head scratching to me. But either way, the Commanders get a very, very good left tackle. So that will certainly help Jaden Daniels continue to grow as they're looking to go as all in as they possibly can, because they've made some moves as well. Obviously, they had the Deebo Samuel trade a few days ago that kind of kicked everything off and started, with all the rumors that kind of led up to where we are now. And the Commanders, they did lose a player earlier. It was De'Ami Brown. They lost him to the Jags. So they will have to see if they can find another guy to be like a depth receiver, because it's going to obviously be Terry McLaurin, and then Deebo Samuel is probably most likely going to be your number two. So you want to try and see if you can find somebody that can, make up the rest of that roster, because they still have some players there. They did re-sign Zach Ertz, saw that the other day, so that was another solid move for the Commanders. They still have a lot of cap space, so I certainly feel like they can continue to make moves and may have a blockbuster deal here or two. You never know in the next coming days. Jonathan Allen, their defensive end, is a free agent. He is one of the better free agents that are available. I'm going to talk a little bit about him in the final segment when we get to the best free agents remaining in this class so far. But so he is a free agent, so they'll have to see if they can do something to, mitigate him being gone as well. They got the left side of the offensive line taken care of, so now they've got to get the defensive line taken care of if they can't re-sign Jonathan Allen, which doesn't seem like they will at this point. Another big contract or another big deal that happened as well is another Eagles defensive player from that Super Bowl defense is going to a different team next year, and that's going to be Josh Sweat. He is going to be going to the Cardinals as he signed a deal earlier this year, or not this year, earlier today. I believe it was about 4 years, about 78 million, something like that. I apologize if I'm getting the numbers wrong there, but big deal there, big time player. So that he was, it's kind of interesting now with the Eagles because they've lost a couple of guys. They lost Milton Williams, and now, of course, so they might need to dip into defensive line in the draft again. They've been doing that over the past few years, and it's, of course, worked out for them. They've hit on a number of guys. So it's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do in the draft. It's starting to become more and more likely that maybe they go defensive line to see if they can reload that, already pretty solid defensive line that won the Super Bowl last year. So that was a big move as well. So tons of moves happening, in free agency. And this is going to continue probably throughout the course of this entire week, most likely, with things starting to really ramp up. And then Wednesday, of course, being the official first day of free agency, I would not be surprised if we see some pretty head-turning deals on that day as well. Should be a fun couple of days. We should have a lot of things to talk about as far as free agency and just leading up to the draft. Of course, we're going to focus a little bit more into the draft as it gets closer. But right now, it's a pretty fun time to be an NFL fan. Players are on the move. Blockbuster trades are happening. So we'll see what happens, and we'll talk more about that in the coming days. But for now, we're going to take another quick break. And when we come back, we're going to dive back into our season outlook series. We're going to be touching on the last AFC division that we have to cover, and that is the AFC West. And we're going to be touching on two teams from the AFC West, and that is the Chargers and the Chiefs. The Chargers had some news earlier tonight that we'll talk about as well. So just stick around, and we will be right back after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys, welcome on back to the third segment in our show today. We are going to be continuing our season outlook series, and this time we're going to be talking a little bit about the LA Chargers and what they did last year and what they need to do and what they are currently doing in the offseason this year leading into next year. So taking a look at what they did last year, finished second in the AFC West behind the Kansas City Chiefs with an 11-6 record, lost in the wild card round on the road to Houston. They had kind of an up and down sort of year, but they found their stride a little bit towards the end of the year with Justin Herbert. He was dinged up a little bit in the early going of the year, had an ankle injury, kept him out of a couple games, but since he came back from that, he did take a couple games to try and, actually get back into the rhythm of things. But once he did, and that offense started to click with their physical style of running the ball and playing really good defense, they were able to, have a pretty solid year overall. 11-6 is, nothing to sneeze at, especially in the AFC West, a very tough division, especially with Denver starting to come up now too. And we'll talk a little bit more about them most likely tomorrow and what they have got going on there. But as far as the Chargers, take a look at what they did last year. First in the league in defense in terms of points allowed. They kind of kept that ranking for most of the whole year. They were consistently very good defensively. Their issues, the ones that they had, were on offense. So defensively, they were very good for the most part. They were, like I said, first in the league in points allowed. They were seventh in the league in sacks with 45 sacks, and eighth in the league in interceptions as well with 15. So they were very good, opportunistic, very good defense. It was the offense that had some issues. Running the ball is what they want to do. They didn't get consistent play out of either of their running backs that they had last year. Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins has had injury injury issues in his history, and that kind of reared its ugly head a little bit. It wasn't a major injuries that he had, but him and Gus Edwards, they didn't play a full 17-game season, either one of them. I believe J.K. Dobbins had 13 games that he started in, and Gus Edwards had about 11 games that he played in. Gus Edwards is no longer there now. But speaking of running backs with the LA Chargers, just a few minutes before I actually stepped onto this show, the Chargers had agreed to I believe, 3-year deal with former Steelers running back Najee Harris to have him move to LA. And that is a good move for Najee Harris, I believe. He's a guy that I wouldn't label him a bust. He wouldn't necessarily have these crazy numbers or anything like that, but he has 1,000 yards in each one of his 4 seasons as a starter in Pittsburgh. So you don't get that way by being a bust. You've got to be a good player, or at least a solid player. And he's an NFL running back. He may not be a Saquon Barkley, but he's a durable running back. He doesn't fumble very often. The thing that always hurt Najee Harris is that he doesn't have the explosiveness that you're used to seeing. He doesn't have that, ability to hit the home run. His longest run that he had in Pittsburgh was like a 35-yarder or something like that went for a touchdown. He doesn't have long runs, but he is a good physical runner, and when he is running hard and running at his best, he's a very hard running back to bring down. He's got a mean, stiff arm that he has definitely put a lot of people on posters with, in his time in Pittsburgh. So he is absolutely a guy that will be of use for the Chargers, and especially Jim Harbaugh, as he loves to run the ball, and that's a perfect type of running back to have in that scenario. So good for the Chargers. They're shoring up their running back position, and you take a look at the rest of their offense. The bright spot on their offense was Ladd McConkey, the rookie wide receiver out of Georgia. He ended up having a tremendous year. He had over 1,100 yards, had 7 touchdowns. Very good wide receiver. Quentin Johnson is still on the roster there too, guy they drafted about a year ago or 2 years ago at this point. And he was decent. He had just over 700 yards, but he still hasn't reached that plateau that they want him to reach when they first drafted him. But, he was decent enough, but I still feel like the Chargers need a little bit more in terms of wide receiver, because Ladd McConkey, I feel like, is going to be their number 1 guy for a while, or at least number 2 guy, whatever the case. He's a starter. So they need to find another guy, because I don't believe that Quentin Johnson is going to be your long-term number 1 wide receiver. That's not a guy that you can rely on to be the number 1 receiver, in my opinion. He is a number 2 or number 3 receiver at best, in my opinion. So they need to go out and get a guy to push him, or maybe, just strengthen that wide receiver room just overall. A couple of guys that they could look at. A development in the Cooper Kupp situation is that the Rams are actually not going to trade him. So they're going to actually make him a free agent by releasing him. So the Chargers could just say, hey, before you pack your bags and leave LA, why don't you just come across the hall and talk to us? And he could end up signing with the Chargers. I feel like that's a possibility. And him being or not being able to be traded is reason enough to believe that they probably won't need to spend a ton of money to get him. If nobody was willing to trade for him, I doubt that it's going to be a mammoth, massive contract to sign Cooper Kupp. So he could be a guy that is going to be on a lot of people's radars, a lot of teams that are, needy at the wide receiver position. So we'll see what they do. for that position. Another piece of news in regards to the Chargers, they did re-sign Khalil Mack, their edge rusher, 1-year deal, $18 million. Not really a surprise there. There was talk that he might be re-signed, at least for a 1-year deal. I don't think there was too much movement in terms of him going somewhere else because he was a free agent this year. Not too surprising that they signed him. And he is, one of those guys that is, despite his age, because he's getting up there in age, he's still been effective for the Chargers. He's been effective everywhere he's went, whether it be the Raiders, the Bears, or, now the Chargers. Khalil Mack has always been solid, he's not in his prime anymore, so he doesn't have that same burst that he used to have back in his Chicago days and his Oakland days, but he's still good enough to be their starting edge rusher, and they need as much help as they can possibly get with their unexpected release of Joey Bosa, which was pretty interesting. And now there's talk that Joey Bosa could end up going to San Francisco to pair with his brother, Nick Bosa. That would be a pretty interesting pairing there. That would be a pretty ferocious tandem and an already pretty solid San Francisco defense, although they did lose Drake Greenlaw today to the Broncos as well. So, that's a big loss as well. But he was hurt all year last year, but then again, so was everybody on the 49ers. But either way, Chargers, if you take a look at what they might be doing in the draft, I could see them going wide receiver since it is not necessarily the deepest class at a wide receiver this year, but there's still some guys that they could probably get in the later rounds, because I don't believe they will have a number one type, like first round type wide receiver. I don't believe one will be available when they have to pick later in the draft. So maybe they go after a receiver in the second round or something like that, and maybe they try and shore up some of the offensive line in the draft, using the draft. So there's not a ton of free agents to look at in terms of the offensive line, unless a guy gets made available via trade. Most likely, I would think they'll probably address that through the draft. Defensive line help could, absolutely help as well. That is a more deeper position, as we've talked about at length. The position of defensive line, there's a lot of guys that you can get just about anywhere in the draft this year. You can get a guy in the third round, and he can still end up being very productive for you. So it'll be interesting to see what the Chargers decide to do in the draft, just like it is, with every team. This is just one of those interesting parts of the year, fun parts of the year, just to kind of speculate and find out what every team might be doing and all that. In terms of what I think the Chargers' record might be this year, obviously with the addition of Najee Harris, that's going to improve the run game, because he's not going to be asked to be the number one every down back, because they still have J.K. Dobbins there to split carries with. I think it'll be a pretty similar situation to what he had in Pittsburgh. But I think the Chargers, they won 11-6 last year. I think they absolutely have the potential to get at least a win better than that. That's where I have them right now. I have them at 12-5, challenging potentially the Chiefs for that AFC West title. It's obviously been very, very hard for anybody to take that from the Chiefs, as they've been good for a very long time now with, Patrick Mahomes and all of those guys. But they lost a couple guys, so, maybe this is the year for the Chargers to step up. Broncos are going to be a tough challenge as well. Raiders seem to be getting better, even though they're probably the bottom of the division at the end of this year, I would think, out of all of those teams. But you never know. A lot of things can happen. They do have Geno Smith now, so they could end up being a little bit better than what we expect them to be, or what I might expect them to be. But I have the Chargers going 12-5, and I still have to put them just under the Chiefs, though, as we'll get to the Chiefs here in a second. But I just, until they unseat the Chiefs, the Chargers are just always going to be that team in my mind that are just always right on the cusp of being really, really good, but just can't seem to get over the hump for whatever reason. They have a good cast of characters. Justin Herbert's a good young quarterback, but he's not going to be young forever, and they need to really see a heavy return on the investment for Justin Herbert and actually get that offense going to where they want it to go, because with the talent that they have at the quarterback position, there's no reason why they should be struggling to put up points. So I think the Chargers are still a good team, and they will go 12-5, and it's going to be a pretty close division matchup here between those two teams. When those two teams play next year, it's going to be pretty interesting. So Chargers at 12-5, that's what I have them. So we are going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about the rival to the Chargers in that division, the always beloved Kansas City Chiefs. So just stick with me, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
All right, guys, welcome on back to the show. Our next segment that we've got is the season outlook for the Kansas City Chiefs, the AFC champion. Kansas City Chiefs obviously finished the season with a 15-2 record, number one seed in the AFC, got all the way to the Super Bowl, and lost to the Philadelphia Eagles 40-22 in a game that was not necessarily even that close. So they have, despite being very good all the time, and despite getting to the Super Bowl again, they have some question marks on the Chiefs, and we'll get into that here. But taking a look at what they did overall in the season last year, they were, of course, it was highlighted throughout the entire year that they were going for the three-peat. One of the hardest things to accomplish in all of sports, really. It really doesn't matter what sport it is, to win 3 consecutive championships in any sport is impressive. And the Chiefs, to their credit, got further than any other NFL team that was trying to accomplish that same feat. Every other team that was trying to three-peat either did not make the playoffs or lost in the first or second round of the playoffs. The Chiefs got all the way to the Super Bowl, which is something that no other team in that scenario has ever done. So that deserves some credit as well. And obviously the Chiefs are one of those teams that a lot of people recently at least love to hate. Whether it's just the Taylor Swift stuff with Travis Kelce, or it's just the, I'll just say head-scratching decisions that some officials make during the course of some of their games. The fact of the matter is that all those things may be true and may be valid arguments, but they are still a very well-coached team and a very good team. You don't get to 15 wins despite not even scoring 30 points throughout a course of a season. You don't get that way without being very well coached, which is a pretty crazy stat, that 30 points a game thing. The fact that they did not score 30 points in a game all season long was pretty crazy, and they still ended up going 15-2. And a lot of people thought that this was kind of a down year for the Chiefs. And a down year for the Chiefs happens to be a 15-win season and a trip to the Super Bowl, which is just tells you everything you need to know about, the way that or organization is run, or that dynasty now is run. Some people are questioning whether or not this dynasty of the Chiefs is starting to, kind of fall off maybe, because there were a few question marks throughout the course of the season with their offense. They didn't necessarily light up anybody like we're accustomed to them doing back when they had the guys like Tyreek Hill and, Sammy Watkins and all those guys. But now they still do have a good cast of characters at the receiver position. It did kind of hurt them that Rashee Rice, had his injury issue. But, they still have a very good receiver core. Whether or not they bring back Juju, I'm not sure. Haven't heard too much about that yet. They may end up moving on for him. They got him in the middle of the season, but of course they have familiarity with him from him being on their previous Super Bowl roster. But they might move on from him. They might re-sign him. I'm not sure. But they still have 3 other guys, not including Travis Kelce, who's a receiver in his own right, But they have Xavier Worthy, who is still very, very good, had a good rookie campaign, came onto the scene very, very quickly with his very first catch in his NFL career, leading to a touchdown, which was a very impressive touchdown, too. It really showed off his spurt or his speed burst that he has. And that is something that is always seemingly in abundance for the Chiefs. But the other receivers they have, of course, they have Hollywood, Marquise Brown. He was another guy that didn't get a lot of playing time last year simply because of his injury that he had in the offseason. So he was out for a number of games. They had a little bit of friendly fire with Rashee Rice's injury with Patrick Mahomes inadvertently, running into his knee and, of course, tearing the ACL, and he was out all year. So that was not good, and that definitely affected the Chiefs' offense, and you saw that throughout the course of the season with some of the numbers that they were putting up. They weren't necessarily super impressive. Now, if you take a look at Patrick Mahomes' actual individual numbers, you would think that he still had a pretty solid year overall because he ended up with just under 4,000 yards. He had about 3,970, something like that, but just under 4,000 yards he had and 26 touchdowns, and he did have 11 interceptions, which for Patrick Mahomes is, a pretty high number. He's usually pretty careful with the ball. But they had a lot of issues on offense this year, but they were able to overcome them for the most part because of something they also had, which was a very strong defense led by Chris Jones. All those guys, Karlaftis, a lot of really good players. Eric Reed, the veteran safety, tons of good players on that team. Trent McDuffie, another guy, at corner. So the Chiefs had a ton of really, really good players on defense, and they were very good holding teams. One of their best stats that they had was fourth in points allowed per game. They were stuffing everybody. And if you get a team like the Chiefs and you get a defense like that, that's a very scary proposition. And, they got all the way to the Super Bowl. But just imagine if you could pair that Chiefs defense from last year to the Chiefs offense that had like Tyreek Hill and prime Travis Kelce, like that Chiefs offense, they would be pretty much unstoppable. You could be looking at a completely undefeated season if those two things merged. And I think that the Chiefs offense has the ability to get to that point again offensively because they have some weapons, and they could still add weapons too in the offseason. They haven't really done much really so far in terms of skilled positions, but I could see them going after somebody. Maybe, I know we've talked about this guy a lot, but maybe Cooper Kupp could be just one more veteran piece that they want to add. Don't think that's likely. I think it's a bit of a stretch there, but you never know with the Chiefs. They're always looking to try and get one up on everybody in terms of, advantages, from a football perspective. So that could be something they do. I honestly think, though, that they might be going after running back here in the draft, especially just with as deep as the draft class is. Despite the fact that Isaiah Pacheco, I think, is a pretty solid running back, I think that he lacks the explosiveness that they're looking for in that offense. He is a bruiser of a running back, runs really hard, really well, but they need like a speed guy that they can, put on an offense. Whether or not they do that in the first round, I doubt, because they do need offensive line help. They need a left tackle pretty badly. They did sign a veteran I think it was earlier tonight, they signed one, but they did lose Joe Thuney to the Bears, and they lost another offensive lineman throughout free agency too. I can't place his name right now. But yeah, so they're going to need to shoulder up that offensive line. Left tackle is probably going to be most likely their pick whenever they pick in the first round. I believe it's 31 is their pick. So look to see them go left tackle with that pick. But moving on to everything else that they might need, they did lose a receiver in Justin Watson earlier today. He signed elsewhere. Like I said before, they lost Joe Thuney to the Bears. Bears are really, doing their due diligence to try and shore up both their offensive and their defensive lines, really trying to grow from the trenches. So that is a very intriguing team to watch in the offseason as they've continued to try and build up this Bears team to being, really, really good. So having Joe Thuney from Kansas City is definitely going to help protect Caleb Williams as well. Maybe they go after a free agent guy like a Trent Brown or Tyron Smith, one of those guys that play left tackle. And just even if they draft a guy, they can have one of those veteran guys be the starter, until the guy is ready to come in and be the starter himself, whoever it is they decide to draft. But those are just a couple options that I could see the Chiefs potentially looking into. Veteran guys, those are older guys, so they're not going to be guys that you're going to spend a ton of money to get, most likely, and they're not going to be guys that you're going to have for a whole bunch of years either, eating up cap space. So I think it would be cost effective for the Chiefs to go after one of those guys and maybe draft a replacement, when that person is ready, in the draft. So I could see them doing that. So a few other things that they need to do. We mentioned running back as well, Isaiah Pacheco. Kareem Hunt probably not going to return, I would think. So like I said before, they could dip into the draft with a running back because there's a lot of players in the draft class that's going to be, available. A guy that I would maybe look into, a guy that could potentially fall to them, would be Cam Scatterbo, because I think a guy like Ashton Genty and Amarian Hampton, I think those are going to be your first two running backs taken off the board. But Cam Scatterbo, I think, is another guy that could be something that could, really enhance that offense. Travion Henderson, also from Ohio State, he could be another guy that you could look into. And the list goes on and on. There's just so many good running backs available right now. Trevor Etienne, Travis Etienne's brother, Trevor Etienne, coming from Georgia. He's another guy that's kind of on the, lower totem pole of the running backs that you see mentioned, but he is still a quality running back. And that could be a guy that the Chiefs could probably get in on day 3 possibly. So that would be a pretty good steal there for the Chiefs, especially with their offense and the way they're usually able to come up with schemes and things like that. I think that could be, a running back that could absolutely benefit that offense for sure. As far as what I think the Chiefs might do this year record-wise, it's pretty hard to kind of imagine them getting 15 wins again next year. But I have bet against the Chiefs before, and it has not worked out. So I wouldn't be surprised if they get to 15 wins again. But I personally am going to go a little bit lower on the totem pole. I still think they win the division, but I think they get to 12 or 13 wins. If they get to 12 wins, I see them having the tiebreaker over the Chargers, who I also listed at 12 wins, and finishing below the Chiefs in that division. So I could see the Chiefs getting 12 or 13 wins. They'll still be a force in the playoffs as usual. They'll still be the team that everyone's looking to beat. Even if they're not the number 1 seed like they were this year, they'll still be that team that everyone is pointing to as these are the guys that we need to knock off if we want to get to the Super Bowl. And it's going to be much of the same again this year. And it doesn't really matter to me what they do in free agency or the draft. I still firmly believe the Chiefs are going to be right there in the mix at the end, just like they always are, as long as they've got Andy Reid as head coach and Patrick Mahomes as the quarterback. Usually I would say Travis Kelce, but maybe not so much anymore because I feel like he is well past his prime, and he doesn't necessarily give you the same type of advantage that he used to when he was in his prime. He was arguably the best tight end in the game, one of the best tight ends of all time, and he is a surefire Hall of Famer, absolutely no doubt there. But I feel like he is, taking a step back. So if they can get a little bit better play out of Travis Kelce, maybe they go back to the Super Bowl again, and maybe they win it this time instead of losing like they did a few months ago. But either way, like I said, I have them 12-5. And that is my outlook for the Kansas City Chiefs. Tomorrow we're going to get into the second half of the AFC West when we talk about season outlooks for the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders. Some interesting things to talk about with both of those teams, as the Raiders, of course, getting a new quarterback with Geno Smith, and then the Broncos trying to make some moves to shore up their defense. with Hufanga from San Francisco. That's a guy who plays in the secondary, and he's kind of a linebacker as well. That's a very quality player the Broncos picked up. And the Broncos, of course, getting Dre Greenlaw as well, also from San Francisco. So a lot of things to talk about with the Broncos as they try and, improve on Bo Nix's year 2, to see what they can do as they got to the wild card last year and see if they can improve a little bit on their positioning. So that'll be interesting to get into both of those teams. But as for now, we're going to take another quick break. This will be our final break of the day. And when we come back, I'm just going to go through a little bit of a list that I made up right before this show started of just some of the guys that are still out there as of this recording and who they might necessarily go to. So just stick around for that, and we will be right back after this last break. All right, guys, welcome on back to the final segment of tonight's show. We're going to be just going through some of the free agents and some of the ones that are still available and who the best free agents are that are still available. Now, of course, we're still pretty early in this whole process here, and free agency doesn't actually officially start until Wednesday at 4 o'clock when everybody can sign their contracts that they have been, talking about over the past day or so. Couple of good free agents that are still remaining, though. First one up is Vikings cornerback Byron Murphy Jr. Think of a few teams that could use some corner help. My own favorite team, the Steelers, could absolutely use that help just because I know they signed Darius Slay earlier, but he is an older cornerback, and I feel that he's more of like a depth guy and not necessarily a starter. So maybe, I could see him going there. Maybe the Steelers don't sign him because they signed Darius Slay, but there's a number of other teams that need secondary help. And Byron Murphy is only 27 years old, just turned 27, and he had 6 picks last year on a very good Vikings defense. So he is a guy to keep an eye out for because I'm pretty sure he's going to be snatched up in the next day or so. He's just too good of a player to just leave out there, for days and days. He'll get a pretty high deal, I would imagine, pretty max deal. So he's a guy to look out for. Another guy, if you're looking to pick up some offensive line help, you could look towards former Eagles guard Mekhi Becton. He was a big part of that Saquon Barkley 2,000-yard season that they had last year. They were notorious for having a very strong offensive line, and he was a part of that line. So quality player there. Anybody that needs offensive line help, especially on the interior where he plays, he's definitely a guy that I would look out for. There are plenty of teams out there that could use some offensive line help. We talked about one of them in the past segment there with the Chiefs. The Chiefs could go after a guy like Mekhi Becton, maybe go get a guy that beat you in the Super Bowl. If you can't beat him, just go get him, essentially. But yeah, so I definitely see him as being snatched up. He's one of the better guards out there, too. The Colts have a guard as well that is a free agent, Will Fries, and he is another guy that I would keep an eye out for. People that are trying to shore up their offensive line on the interior. He's another guy that can come in and be an immediate starter and really, help your offensive line and help the run offense as well from that interior offensive line. Another guy that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, but I feel like he's not getting a ton of attention, is Stephon Diggs. He's still out there at wide receiver. Signed a 1-year deal with the Texans last year. Didn't really work out the way they wanted to. They did get to the playoffs, lost in the divisional round to the Chiefs, but Stephon Diggs was largely absent for a good chunk of the year as he had a couple of injuries, and he had a few touchdowns, but overall probably not necessarily what they thought when they were signing Stephon Diggs to that deal. They only signed him to a 1-year deal, though, so that makes him a free agent, and he is a viable option for many teams, any team that's looking for a wide receiver, a veteran wide receiver, because at this point in his career, he's not a number one receiver. Maybe he was when he was in Buffalo and, even before that when he was in Minnesota, but not anymore. He's not a number one guy. He is a veteran presence that you could have in your locker room. And he does have some issues, off the field issue, or not necessarily, not like legal off the field issues, but just like sideline tantrums, just things where he's just unhappy. There's been stories about that. Didn't really hear too much about that in Houston, but he was only there for a year. We got a lot of that in Buffalo, though, that there were some complaints about Stephon Diggs. So always something to look out for when you're talking about a wide receiver. Just about every wide receiver has that same kind of mindset, though, so you kind of just have to live with it at a certain point. If they're good enough, you can kind of live with some, tantrums here and there, because wide receivers, they're going to throw tantrums. That's just the nature of the business. It's just the way they are. As guys that make their living on getting the ball, they're going to be very adamant about wanting the ball. So I get it, definitely do. But wide receivers are divas. You just have to deal with it, But another guy that's not necessarily really a diva, but he is a free agent, and that is Amari Cooper, the former Browns and Bills wide receiver. The Browns traded him to the Bills during the season this past year, and then, of course, now he is a free agent. Don't know if the Bills are going to re-sign him. They might re-sign him, though, because they did just lose Matt Collins to New England. He signed I think it was a 3-year deal he signed with them. So maybe the Bills re-sign Amari Cooper, but as of right now, he is a free agent. He's still a solid receiver. A physical guy, great route runner, has got strong hands, he is a good player. Not necessarily in his prime anymore. He's kind of in the back end of his career, like a lot of these free agent receivers are, but he can still come in and be a solid number 3 receiver for you, or, a depth piece, maybe a number 4 guy if you have a stacked wide receiver room already, but he can come in and be effective. You don't have to give him 10, 15 targets a game. You can give him a handful of that, and he'd be just fine, and he'd still be effective for you, especially down in the red zone with his ability to go up and get the ball. So that's a guy definitely keep an eye on for. I would absolutely expect to see him sign somewhere, maybe even re-signing with the Bills. Would not surprise me. One of the more high-profile players that we've talked about over the past few days, and you may have seen in the news and all that, is the Chargers releasing Joey Bosa, and so now he is a free agent. There's been numerous teams that, of course, want his services. The most likely, seemingly right now, based on some of the reports that we've heard, is possibly a reunion with his brother Nick Bosa in San Francisco, and that would be a very good move for the 49ers, especially with them losing Dre Greenlaw earlier today to the Denver Broncos, as we mentioned earlier. So having Joey Bosa opposite Nick Bosa would be a pretty good tag team as your edge rushers. So definitely a guy that I would absolutely look into signing. If you're needy at that position, he is one of the best guys, one of the best overall players available in free agency right now. So absolutely, definitely look into him if you're a team that needs some help on your defensive line or on your edge to set your edge. So he is a very good player. A couple of other guys, obviously we mentioned Amari Cooper from the Bills. Do have to mention these two guys just because I wouldn't necessarily say they're one of the best free agents available, but they're definitely some of the more popular names out there. Aaron Rodgers, still a free agent, of course. They can't release him until Wednesday. We talked a little bit about him earlier. Potential links to the Steelers, possibly even the Giants as well. We'll have to see what happens in the next day or so with that story, or if maybe we hear something, later tonight after I get off of this show here. Maybe something has already happened. Who knows? But that's just the nature of free agency. But another guy that is still being talked to by the Steelers and by other teams is Russell Wilson. And with Justin Fields moving on to the Jets, I think it's become increasingly more likely that Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, those are your two choices if you're the Steelers in terms of who your quarterback's going to be next year. I don't see it being anybody else other than those two unless they decide to go off the beaten path and maybe trade for Kyler Murray, which I've heard. That could be a rumor. He could become available. If he becomes available, the Steelers need to absolutely make a phone call to Arizona about Kyler Murray. I feel like they should probably do that even now, just with rumors surrounding. They have to shore up this quarterback position. Not getting Justin Fields, I think, is a big detriment to what they want to do on offense this season and just overall. They have to get a viable quarterback. I do not believe Aaron Rodgers is that viable quarterback for the Steelers. Russell Wilson, I could live with coming back to the Steelers because he's been in the system for a year. So adding a guy he's familiar with in DK Metcalf and familiar with how he runs his routes and how he plays and all that would only benefit, the offense, in that scenario. So if you're going to go after an aging quarterback, I'd much rather it be Russell Wilson than Aaron Rodgers, just simply because of that fact. He has experience with DK Metcalf, and he has experience in that system. He's been in it for a year. So let him come back, let him be the guy, or go draft a guy. That's what I would do. I personally am on the side of draft a guy because I would rather neither of these guys be my quarterback next year, but that's just me speaking as a fan. But those two guys are definitely names to watch out for. I could see Russell Wilson. I know there have been talks that he could be going to the Titans. The Titans have showed interest, which kind of came out of left field a little bit. Nobody was really talking about the Titans for, that, because a lot of people sort of assumed that the Titans were going to draft a quarterback with that number one pick. But if they end up signing Russell Wilson, that kind of makes you wonder, okay, so are they going to end up trading that number one pick to the Giants like we've talked about a lot? So that could be something that is being worked on as we speak, for all we know. But Aaron Rodgers, I could see him going to the Steelers as much as I wouldn't, necessarily agree with it. He could go to the Giants also. I think it's more likely, if he goes anywhere, I think it's more likely the Steelers than the Giants. That's just my opinion. And I could see Russell Wilson ending up with either the Giants or the Titans in that regard. There's a couple of guys in the draft that could end up falling too because of everything that's happening in free agency. Quarterbacks are being sent to teams that are needy of quarterbacks, and maybe now they don't necessarily need to draft a quarterback. Teams like the Seahawks or the Raiders, they've got new quarterbacks. The Jets probably won't draft a quarterback at this point anymore. So if the Titans get Russell Wilson and say the Giants get Aaron Rodgers, I think you could chalk those two teams up as teams that probably are not going to go quarterback first round. So then you kind of start thinking, do the Steelers think about trading up to try and get one of these guys like Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders? I don't think you'll be able to trade up to get Cam Ward because I think you're going to have to give up a little bit too much. But Shedeur Sanders, I think that's possible, especially with news that he could potentially be falling in a lot of people's draft boards. I don't know if it's attitude concerns or whatever the case, but he could be a guy the Steelers could maybe go after if he's not, say if he's like falls all the way to 18. I could see a scenario in which the Steelers maybe trade up to get to number 18 to sign him. It wouldn't surprise me. But either way, that just about covers it for our nice lengthy free agency period here. This whole show was, I know, pretty heavily influenced by free agency, but that's just kind of, how things are going right now. So once again, though, I do want to thank you guys all for joining me. on the GSMC Football Podcast. We are, of course, as always, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. So we also invite you guys to follow us on all the social medias, Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram, all of that stuff for more content and updates. Thank you once again, guys, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to